Hello and welcome to Agora Politics. This is your host, Alex Murshak. Today I'm speaking with Bo Winegard. Bo is an independent scholar. Bo, how you doing?
I'm good. Thank you. Thank you for having me on.
Yeah, well, I'm actually really excited to finally meet you in person. You obviously don't know who I am, most likely, but I've been following you from afar on Twitter for a very long time, and you've been like a prominent voice in a lot of the, I guess, overlapping political circles that we run in. And so, yeah, you're actually the first person that I've been able to have on the show who's been canceled, and so that's a very big honor for me. I'm really happy to finally be
Yeah.
giving platforms to the canceled, and I actually hope to have more people on who've been canceled. Coming up soon in the future here. I have some friends who've been canceled, and
Yeah.
a lot of them are great people. Some of them for ridiculous reasons, some of them for more questionable reasons, but you know, it's uh it's just becoming a crazy world out there. So before we get into that aspect of things, do you want to just introduce yourself to the audience, talk a little bit about where you came from in your academic background and some of the research you've been involved in?
Oh, wow. Okay. I am very intellectually eclectic, I think you would say. I actually was into literary studies, and then I just kind of became disenchanted with it because of the politics. And so I went into ultimately into social psychology, but I was more interested in evolutionary psychology.
Hmm.
But I was told by people as an undergrad that there weren't many jobs for evolutionary psychologists, so I just picked social psychology. And then I went to Florida State under the tutelage of Roy Baumeister, and that was great because he's not very happy with political correctness, so that worked out for me.
Yeah.
And then I guess I was there for 7 years, I think. It was a struggle to get a job because I had already written about some stuff that was potentially inflammatory. Um, I would say my research, much of it was an extension of signaling theory into various areas, masculinity, for example, grief, uh, anti-gay biases, etc. And then I got interested. This was the fateful interest, as it were. I got interested in human variation,
Hmm.
and then I started writing about that in maybe like 2014, 15. But I was doing the other stuff too. But that started becoming more and more interesting to me. So I would say I got into human variation and political bias. So
Okay.
those two things, and that's probably what I've focused on for the most part for the last 5 years when I'm not doing culture war stuff,
Right.
which has
Right.
consumed more of my time as well. Which either that's good because we need to have the culture war, or I'm wasting my time. I'm not really sure which one. It depends on which day, But so that's what I do these days. I read a lot of history. As you said, I kind of was canceled, so I don't have a career. I don't have a an academic career in front of me, so I'm more into politics now.
Do you want to just go over briefly the incident that occurred at
Sure.
your college?
So, I mean, I would say it was a long year of problems, I think. But the original incident that occurred is I got invited to give a talk at the University of Alabama by
Hmm.
an evolutionary group. And I thought I was working on a paper on human variation. I thought, okay, well, this will be cool. I can sort of like lay out my ideas, and then I'll discipline that into the manuscript, because you like to kill kill the proverbial two birds with one stone. So I had I started putting together this lecture. I sent it to the person who invited me. He approved of it, and I thought, cool. So I went to the campus and everything was fine on the first day. But then the second day, apparently somebody had found my Rat Wiki website
Hmm.
page. And for people not familiar with Rat Wiki, they should know that it's essentially
A
just like
dump.
a, yeah, it's a left-wing hit job that doesn't even have the veneer of objectivity. So it accused me of all kinds of things, but these professors, for whatever reason, decided to take it seriously. And then I think they, I don't know if they encouraged their students to become disgusted with me or if the students were also sharing my Rat Wiki page and articles that I had written, but it turned into a little bit of a scandal. They did allow me to give my presentation. Afterward, it was just, I don't know, I stayed after for like an hour. Every question was, was hostile, which, that's actually fine. I don't have a problem with that. But some people yelled that I was a racist and said things that had nothing to do with the science. So that was unfortunate. So it was an event that I would like to, or I wanted to just forget. But the paper decided, the Alabama student paper decided to write an article about it. And I naively cooperated with them, which I'm not sure what I was thinking. But I thought, okay, well, I'll give them my side of the story. I'll send them my PowerPoint. But their article was completely tendentious and kind of ridiculous. I mean, one of the lines that stands out to me, this isn't verbatim, but it's pretty close. Critics say it's like eugenics. It's like one of those things where, it'd be like my saying, critics say he beats his wife. It's like, well, who says it? Why are you including an
anonymous source says?
Yeah, exactly. So, and also, more disappointingly, the group that invited me threw me under the bus because they apologized to the community who felt unsafe. Now, it's hard to take this seriously, but they literally apologized to the community who may have felt unsafe because I gave a talk about human variation. And they also called it unscientific, although this group, at least one of the people in it, approved of my talk. And I can assure anyone there were some speculations in there, but there was nothing like phrenology or whatever critics would say. So anyway, it was disappointing. And somebody picked up on it and sent it to my bosses. So I had a meeting with my bosses at that point. That was in October. That meeting was actually reasonably pleasant. I said I'm going to continue to pursue controversial topics because that's what I think professors are supposed to do. We're very privileged, and I have the right and the freedom to talk about these issues that are essential. And I didn't really get pushback. I mean, there was talk about being cautious or whatever, or judicious perhaps. I did feel as though it was unfortunate that there wasn't like a robust defense of academic freedom at that point, but there were no threats or anything. And then around Christmas time, some pseudonymous troll started sending emails accusing me of all kinds of, nefarious ideas and desires, and linking all of my articles that I had written that this person found objectionable, apparently, and then linking a tweet of mine that I deleted an hour after I put it out, but I kind of regret deleting it because I stand behind that I wasn't saying anything invidious.
Okay, so it was nothing objectionable that you're ashamed of.
No, it was just people were misinterpreting it because it had an analogy about parasites tearing apart a tree and comparing that to what was happening politically inside the United States. And people were acting as though I was making this about Black people or Jewish people and comparing them to parasites, which I wasn't. It's totally mendacious, and like you have to be bad faith to make that reading of it. But that's what people were doing, and because sorry, go ahead.
Oh, I was going to say, actually, it's interesting that was the analogy that got you in trouble, because I've been hearing a larger platform, Eric Weinstein, make the same analogy to parasites. With reference to sort of our political tumult right now. The way that he talks about it is he says that, the coronavirus and the election and all these coalescing factors came together to sort of weaken our ideological immune system. Mm-hmm. And that allowed, I guess what he was referring to, and I don't remember exactly where he said this, but different strains of sort of parasitic ideologies become empowered, just like if your
Mm-hmm.
immune system gets weakened because
Mm-hmm.
you're under a lot of stress or pressure,
Right.
uh, and then it's allowed to flourish where it otherwise would be suppressed by normal
Yeah.
defenses.
Yeah, and that's interesting. I'd have to think. I'd have to think about the idea, but I mean, the analogy is not objectionable. It's a
Yeah, I was just
perfectly,
pointing that out as like
yeah,
another
right,
person who
exactly.
said this.
That's
It's not
yeah,
ridiculous.
right, exactly. And in the context of my particular tweet, I think it was like very clear that I was talking about the coming apart of America that people such as Charles Murray and others have written about, with the sort of separation of the cognitive elite from other people.
Mhm.
Anyway, this is the tweet. I mean, I think I already worried people around my college, but this tweet then, you know, it was severely criticized, and my bosses were clearly not happy with me. But again, I defended myself. I defended free speech. I'm actually happy that I never capitulated or apologized for anything that I was doing. Uh, at the end of my second meeting, there was a lot of stuff going on. Talk about having independent graders for my classes because I couldn't grade people of color fairly. Like a lot of stuff that I thought was just ridiculous and insulting, frankly.
They were saying that you were going to be biased against colored
Yes.
students because
Yeah.
of the fact that you'd publish these articles on human
I
variation.
think we're supposed to say students of color, right?
Oh, sorry. Yeah, I guess it's 2020, not
Yeah.
1980.
Let's be yes, whatever the appropriate nomenclature is.
If you put the of in, it changes it. It makes it way
Yeah,
better.
it makes it better. Yes, and it's because I accept the undeniable evidence of, like the undeniable reality that there are IQ differences. Now, there's a debate about the causes, and that's perfectly fine, and that's an important debate. But accepting that reality, that's just a fact. There's no dispute about that. And to somehow hold that against me, I just, yeah, I was not happy about that. But I tried to be nice about it, and if that's what it would have taken, I would have consented to that. A lot of this stuff never came to pass. I had this meeting with my bosses, and it was an okay meeting. I certainly did not get the sense that I was going to get terminated. Nobody said that. Not once was there even you got to do X, Y, or Z, otherwise you will suffer the consequences. So it just came out of the blue a month later, I think it was, or maybe 2 months later in March when they told me. They just, they came to my office and told me, and I mean, I had been preparing for the eventuality of getting fired because I knew, obviously, that I was talking about a lot of controversial topics, and I was honest about my views, which most professors aren't, so they just lie about it or keep quiet about it, and I didn't want to do that. So I knew that I was playing with proverbial fire, but I actually was a big shock when it happened because I thought that I had managed to save myself. Yeah, so that's what happened. And like at this point, I'm done with academia. There's just no way I can possibly get a job. I mean, my rat wiki is like one of the first things that come up when you search me. And even though it's disgracefully tendentious and I mean borderline slanderous, there's nothing I can do about it. And all it takes is one person to look at that and say, why do we want this person at our college, right? We don't want this person. And things are much worse now post George Floyd's death than they were before, and they were already bad before. So, so my
Hmm.
academic career came to a flaming demise pretty quickly.
Oh, okay. So, thank you for bearing that to us.
Sure,
I know it's still kind of fresh, but
I'm
I,
I'm good with it at this point. I'm fully reconciled.
I'm sure you saw this train coming for a long time.
I saw it for a bit, yeah.
Uh, So I wanted to get a little bit into some of your research interests. I know you're still publishing, so you're still active as an independent scholar.
Yeah.
And talk a little bit about, you said that you had an interest in human variation and that got you into trouble. Really, if you look at differences between groups in almost any way now, unless they're very specific, you have a specific angle on it, it's pretty hard to get anything passed. So do you want to go into some of the topics specifically that you were interested in human variation and what your core academic research is focused on?
Sure.
I know you've talked a little bit about, I guess not a little bit, a lot about, masculinity and, the perceptions of misogyny and how pervasive it is in our society and so forth. So let's just get into some of those.
Okay, so I think we could start with masculinity and then move on because human variation, that's sort of the incendiary topic.
Okay,
so
we'll leave the touchy stuff for later.
Yeah.
Deeper in.
Yeah. So masculinity is interesting. Just sort of male rituals, male behaviors. Those kinds of things fascinated me. And I was really interested because Jeffrey Miller, who's an evolutionary psychologist, wrote a wonderful book called The Mating Mind. And I think I read this when I was like 19 or something, and it profoundly affected me. And the basic argument in The Mating Mind, this will seem like a digression, but I'm going to tie it back together. The basic argument in The Mating Mind was that a lot of behavior, art, musical performance, poetry, etc. A lot of these behaviors that are culturally important to us are actually signals that communicate underlying genetic fitness to the other sex. Now, I'm simplifying a bit because he did accept a mutual mate choice idea, and he didn't think that it's only like men trying to attract women. He thought women exercise choice and both did, but basically that these cultural displays were signals designed to woo the other sex. And I was just captivated by that at the time. I was interested in evolutionary psychology, but I had not heard any kind of arguments like that. And so I really started thinking about cultural displays because I was fascinated with literature from my literary studies, and I just love literature and I love film and art, etc. So, I wanted to sort of crack the evolutionary logic of that nut. And I started thinking, a lot of this stuff seems as though it's not really designed to appeal to women, but rather to appeal to other men. So if you start thinking about cultural displays throughout most of history, they seem as though they have a male audience as the intended target. So if you go back to Homer, Homer may be more complicated, but like Thucydides or something, a Greek historian, most men were illiterate too, but more women were illiterate than men. Men were the cultural players in classical Greece, right? Overwhelmingly. So a lot of these displays are aimed at men, and it goes throughout history. Even a lot of poetry, I think, romantic poetry, metaphysical poetry before that. I think a lot of this was aimed at impressing other men. So then I started, and then masculinity displays fit in here, right? Because you start thinking,
Can I put you on a pause here?
Yep.
So just to make sure that I'm interpreting this correctly. The idea is that there are these artistic or creative displays, right, that mammals do, or humans and birds and others. And when these are employed by the male, obviously it's to attract, mating opportunities from females of the same species. But his hypothesis here, and the one that you were interested in exploring, was that in fact, it's actually more targeted towards the other males, and the implication being that this is a status game, right? And so if you can achieve status from the other males, what's actually attracted to the females is not necessarily the display itself, but the fact that it garners high status from all the other males.
Exactly. Now, this is more my argument with Miller, right? So I think Miller is a nuanced thinker. Some people don't give him credit for that, but he really is. So I don't want. I'm just going to simplify the view for the sake of making my difference with it clear, with the understanding that I'm doing a disservice to what Miller called the cultural courtship model, right? So the cultural courtship model idea is exactly what you said. Is men are creating artifacts largely to attract women. And I'm arguing against that view by saying what you also said, well, which is that I'm arguing males use displays to signal traits to other males, which get them status, which they can then cash in with mates, right? So exactly as you said, it's not so much that the women are attracted to the displays, although I do think they're attracted to some of the displays, and we can go over that. But it's that they're attracted to status. So let's just think about like what seems to me the sort of purest case here. Let's think about a really great writer, somebody who's up there with James Joyce in prose style, and somebody who's Stephen King. Now, Stephen King's prose is not very good. He might tell good stories. I won't get into that debate, but he's clearly not a prose stylist. So you would think from a signaling perspective, why wouldn't women prefer... So let's say that we have these writers and the Joyce writer is really poor and lives in his mother's basement. And the other one's Stephen King, so very wealthy and prestigious. Which male would most women prefer? And I think the answer is they would most prefer Stephen King. Why? Because he has prestige and resources that he can immediately invest in the woman. And I think what that illustrates is that if you can signal to men, and men give you status, because the people who have more status on average in society, in any society throughout history, have been men.
They have more to gain from it.
Yeah, exactly. So that's the basic idea. So the question is can that help explain masculine displays, like displays that we would think of as being sort of stereotypically masculine? Tattoos, for example, or risk-taking behavior, right? A lot of these ceremonies that you see among various extant hunter-gatherer groups, or up the ladder of human complexity, you see many kinds of rituals that are male activities where you have to show that you can handle pain, or you're courageous. You go on a certain kind of hunt. You have people throw javelins at you, and you have to stand there. You get in fights, whatever it happens to be. Like, what's the point of these? And are these more similar to a Percy Shelley poem than people had previously imagined? And my answer is yes, they are. I mean, they're all displays aimed generally at men to show the possession of some kind of important trait that makes them valuable to a male coalition.
So they don't directly signal fitness necessarily. In fact, some of them may actually take you down in fitness if you go through them, or you might even die. But neither necessarily does Shelley either, right?
Right. I would argue that what a great poet is communicating. I do think that some signals are directed toward women, so I would call that like the alternative mating route, and I think that's real.
There's like intelligence, creativity. I mean, even the ability to sit down and put your focus into something like that.
Yeah, absolutely.
Is a signal.
Yeah. But I think it's also a signal of having an incredibly prodigious mind, a flexible mind, intelligence, I guess we'd get at. That's helpful for male coalitions, right? Because if you're in a coalition, having an intelligent male in your coalition to help you with battle tactics or just help you harvest resources better, that's going to be very helpful. I mean, courage, same thing, right? Strength, etc. So a lot of these displays, I think, are signaling the immediate possession of traits that are beneficial to male coalitions. And I think that can explain, and this maybe I think is an interesting direction that my colleagues and I took some of these thoughts. I think it might be able to explain anti-gay biases. Now, anti-gay biases aren't so pronounced in the West as they used to be, obviously, but for a long time in history, there were severe anti-gay biases. And they follow an interesting pattern because they're they're more often directed at men than women. So there seems to be more hostility toward gay men than toward gay women. And specifically, there's more hostility toward effeminate gay men than masculine gay men. So one argument we made was that homosexuality, it may not really be homosexuality per se that people care about, but rather it's effeminacy that they care about. So they see homosexuality as being synonymous. Shoot, I lost you just for a second. Okay, there we go. They see it as synonymous with effeminacy, and they see effeminacy as something that's not valuable to a male coalition, right? So if you think about a football team, you don't want an effeminate guy, not because you just hate women or effeminacy for no reason, but rather because that male actually cannot contribute to your coalition as well as a very masculine male can.
Mm-hmm.
So I think that this, and now we did a lot of experiments on it, and I've written about it a couple of times. I'm not going to say that this theory is dispositive. It's certainly not. There's a lot of debate about it, but I think it's an interesting direction to take this kind of male-male signaling argument and
Well,
about.
I'll throw a really interesting wrench in it.
All right.
So I'm an identical twin,
So
and oh, interesting.
Yeah.
Cool. Well, welcome to the club. We all know each other apparently. So, and my twin brother is gay, and everybody knows this, so I can say it. But obviously, I'm pretty heteronormative, and so that's always been an interesting difference between us. It's it's impossible to really tell what the origin of that difference might have been developmentally.
Mm-hmm.
But that does give me some interesting insights, I think, into the role of like towards effeminate gay men in our society. Now, like you said, the U.S. has pretty much come around on this. So,
Right.
as far as I know, neither him and I didn't really witness any, and there wasn't a whole lot of direct violence or even threats of violence or even implied threats against him of any kind growing up or anything like that. But I mean, even just being his brother, I received, my fair end of anti-gay and homophobic comments and things like that.
Mm-hmm.
Sometimes they were just directed at me. But it's I do think there is something there because growing up, and I'm just going to say this because it's my personal experience, so I can talk about it. He would spend more time with the girls when we were very young, even in kindergarten. And now even as adults, I mean, if people are doing stuff, if we're going on a trip or we're just working around the house and people are kind of split up into different roles, he tends to gravitate towards the activities that the women are doing, whether that's cooking or talking somewhere or doing something rather than what the men are doing. And I think that's a temperamental thing. I don't know what it says about his value in a coalition, but it certainly signals that he's not interested in being part of the men, and I think that might cause some problems.
Yeah. I mean, there are data that suggest that this is true from an early age. That you generally find that you find it in women too, but we're not focusing on them, so we'll leave them out. You find it men who or boys who become homosexual are more interested in stereotypical feminine activities, behaviors, and even friends.
Hmm.
Uh, and yeah, so I think that's just a fact at this point. And so it is true that on average, homosexuals are more effeminate than heterosexual men. On average. That doesn't mean there aren't severely masculine homosexual men,
Yeah,
right?
yes, there
But
are.
right, but and this isn't now in our papers, we always wrote about physical strength and like courage and perceptions of that. But what's interesting, what you said, I thought about this, and this is just rank speculation, but I do think there are probably psychological differences on average, such that gay men tend to behave a little bit more effeminately in the way they gossip and what they talk about and are interested in. That also probably causes some sort of perception that they might not be as valuable to a masculine coalition in certain contexts. Now, I'm not saying that they are or aren't more valuable. That's a sort of judgment I have no evidence to support one way or the other. But that there are perceptions of it seems pretty clear to me, and I think that's also why. Let me put it this way. One one advantage of this theory is that it can also partially explain, at least, why anti-gay bias has declined so rapidly across the 20th century, which is masculinity is just not as important for society anymore. There are so many coalitions you can create now that don't require physical strength and courage and what we would call traditionally masculine traits. Uh, so, for example, a chess club.
Hmm.
You don't need somebody in or a poetry club. Uh, and you have police, so you don't need to protect your property. You
Well,
don't.
not for long.
Yeah, well, okay, we're going to defund them, and then we'll get back these masculine virtues.
The
Yeah,
social workers and psychologists will move in, and
yeah,
then
they will solve all the problems because crime, of course, is just caused by people who have issues with their parents and they're poor or something.
hey,
Yeah,
hey, he's the psychologist, not me.
yeah, that's what I'm diagnosing it. Yeah. So anyway, these are some speculations about masculinity. Tell you the truth is interesting because I haven't thought about much of that for a long time. I had a paper that came out not too long ago, but I actually wrote it like 2 years ago, and it just, I had to revise and submit to another journal, and it takes a long time before you get anything published. So I just hadn't thought about these things for a while, but I think they're still interesting. I should say I haven't read the literature carefully on a lot of this stuff for like at least 2 years. So I might be something may have come out or interesting research I haven't paid much attention to because it's not the area that I'm most interested in anymore. And you only have 24 hours in a day, unfortunately. So I can't read everything that I would like to. So I should just throw that out there in case anybody's thinking, well, I've read X, Y, and Z since 2018. Maybe I don't know that literature.
Mm. Well, uh, just one last thought on that point you made about the decline of, I guess, male tending traits and their usefulness in our, I guess, general society and functioning and infrastructure.
Mm-hmm.
Um, Obviously, that's a point that people have been talking about for a long time. Even the second wave
Yes.
feminists were
Yep.
acknowledging that there was issues with the value of men going down. You can look at this if you look at the stagnating medium male wages
Mm-hmm.
since the 1970s. Basically, since women were introduced to the workforce, you have just 50%, 100% more competition. So, um, in addition to other factors related to obviously globalization and technology and so forth. Uh, but one of the things that I was thinking about was that actually it may be that the violence against effeminate men has gone down in part because if if the stereotypically masculine traits aren't as valuable anymore, or if they're the ones that are valuable that men have are also shared by lots of women and lots of stereotypically effeminate men, then they actually move to a position where they are contributing as much. So, for
Yeah,
example,
exactly.
I've heard of research that indicates, and I don't know how accurate this is, that that gay men actually make more on average in the marketplace than straight men, and there are many reasons why that might be the case. But that would be a way that they're contributing to a coalition that is a company,
Yep.
and actually earning high status, whether if they're producing really well or earning a lot of money, and therefore they're useful, even though in a prior social structure, they would have been relegated to like picking berries or something.
I'll agree with everything except for the last part, which
Sure. I'll just take credit for that.
But yes, no. I mean, I think that's exactly right. That's exactly right. Is that their actual objective coalitional value is higher now, in the same way that women's coalitional value is higher than it used to be. And by the way, this might be able to explain some aspects of prior, because I don't think there's a lot of misogyny now, but previous, misogyny is that it's not really that men don't like women, because that's obviously silly. I mean, men really
it's completely absurd. It doesn't even make sense evolutionarily.
Yeah, it doesn't make a lot of sense. But what men didn't like for a lot of human history is women trying to participate in typically male domains, probably because on average men were better in those domains. So like if you think of go all the way back to ancient Greece, for example, I mean, they had a system worked out that seemed to make a lot of sense. Men have to fight and risk their lives for the polis. Women have to risk their lives giving childbirth and take care of the house. Men are better at fighting a battle as it was fought in ancient Greece. Like there's, upper body strength, the overlap between men and women is virtually zero. I mean, men are just so much stronger in the upper body that for these kinds of styles of fighting, men were so much better. They were also probably had psychological propensities that made them better fighters. So I think there really just was objectively, on average, men were better at a lot of those things, and therefore they didn't want women to participate in them. And on top of that, women's lives are actually, in some sense, more valuable on average to a coalition because they can have children.
And well, so everybody's known this. I mean, this is always why, women and children go first.
Right.
Men are expendable. Just that's the way it is.
Exactly. And you think about like, I say this in my class, or when I used to teach, I'd say, like, imagine that we have a coalition and we have 2 guys and 50 women. We're fine. Those 2 guys can have sex with all of the women and they'll be kids for the next generation. If you reverse that scenario and you have 50 men and 2 women, that's a problem.
Yeah.
So yes.
Well, I was just saying it, obviously living in times where your whole tribe could get wiped out by an invader or a famine or whatever.
Yeah.
That's a real probability.
Yeah, it's a serious, it's you don't want to mess around as a, like, I think we take the sort of comfort and safety that we have so for granted that we can't understand what it would be like to inhabit a world in which in a year from now, some foreign group of men might just conquer you, kill you, and rape the women, right?
Everybody.
Yeah, we just can't understand
and enslave all your kids.
Exactly. And so, look, like if you're living in one of those societies, the idea that you're being misogynistic would just be ridiculous. Like, what? Like, we have to worry about actually getting killed here. We don't have time for your proto-critical theory or whatever it might be. So anyway, I mean, that's some of that's speculative, but I actually do think I think it's a good thing, by the way, that people are much more tolerant of homosexuality. Obviously, I mean, it's just if we can live in a safer world, in a world in which effeminate men and women have high coalitional value, and therefore people like them, and we can collaborate and stuff, that's a good thing. I like that. So I'm not saying I want to go back to ancient Greece where you could be like, like casually misogynist by today's standards, but I'm just pointing out those norms served an important purpose at that time.
Okay. Well, I mean, so a few things. I mean, one is that it's not entirely clear that male physical asymmetries are outdated in modern combat.
Sure.
I mean, obviously
Yeah,
we can do a lot from a distance, but I know, for example, that the Marines have done studies on, putting women on the front lines, and in their training exercises, the women just they don't score as well on reaction time, on force, use of force, on all kinds of things, and so that has nothing to do with their value in terms of contributing to the military, but it does in terms of pushing forward, like physically rigorous, pushing through physically rigorous challenges, and in times of battle, of war, where it's life and death, and every second does count. If you've got a slightly slower reaction speed time, or someone tries to take a gun away from you and you can't resist them because you don't have the upper body strength, that becomes real. And I think there's this misconception that people get into, where if you say that there are these physical differences, that one gender is somehow better than the other, one sex is better than the other. And the problem with that is, you know this from evolutionary psychology, is that there has to be a 50-50 trade-off between being a man and a woman. Otherwise, we wouldn't have that balance in our species. And so on the long run, there has to be your expected return on being a man or being a woman has to even out, even if the average male and the average women are quite different.
Yeah, the expected fitness return has to be. I mean, you can get something where you get, like permanent sex skew a little bit, but yeah, I mean, basically, like it has to even out. Otherwise, you wouldn't have the split that we have. And
that's fitness. That doesn't necessarily mean happiness.
That might not be our values. Like we might have different values. I don't think our values should derive obviously from what makes fitness sense. But I completely agree with the point about there are clearly places where men on average are still just better. And I think it's one of the unfortunate and perfectly ridiculous, in my opinion, declines in our discourse is our inability to say that without getting in trouble, right? I mean, like, look, men are going to be better at some things on average. Women are going to be better at some things on average.
And that's okay.
Yeah, that's fine. That's okay. Like, I'm better than some people at some things, and I'm a lot worse at some things, and that's okay. It doesn't have to, that doesn't mean that justifies keeping women out of the military. What it does mean is that you have to be careful about that, and you have to think about how are you lowering standards that need to be there for a reason, for example,
or even keeping them off of the front lines. I mean, there's no reason to think dogmatically about this. If you think that that it's a ridiculous policy, then do the tests, conduct some research, and find out.
Yeah, exactly. Totally agree. And I mean, I've actually read reasonable arguments for banning women from combat. Now, you could have women doing other activities, of course, and contributing to the Army, the Navy, the Air Force, but not in the actual combat. I'm not saying I agree with that. I'm just saying there are reasonable arguments there. And I think it's a disservice to the complexity of these problems to just get angry at people when they say these things and try to think them through. I just think that does everybody a disservice because we lose out on these nuanced conversations that we have to have.
So, yeah, or misattributing people's intentions.
Yeah, exactly.
As is often the case.
Yeah, like look, I would rather if you told me you're going to be stuck with somebody for a day in a room and you just have to talk to this person. I would say I would rather be stuck in there with a middle-aged woman. That would be my pick, right? And that seems to be what most people prefer if you ask them. It's like a middle-aged woman because they're nice, they're not going to be violent or aggressive, like, right?
Oh, you mean like so if you get a random person and
Yeah.
you have to choose like the profile of this person.
Yes, exactly.
Okay.
Yeah.
Interesting.
Yeah, so I've thought
They
about
all
that.
want to talk to like grandmas or something.
Yeah, yeah, well, 40, 45-year-old
Okay, okay.
mothers, right?
All
That's what
right.
they, and it makes sense. It totally makes sense. And so, like, in many ways, people prefer women. In
Mhm.
some ways, they prefer men. Like, if I need somebody to build a house for me, I'm going to pick men on average. Not because I don't like women, but because men happen to be better at that. If I
Yeah, I'm
want
sure
some,
I'm sure there are women house builders who could kick my ass at anything.
oh, absolutely. And I'm one of the weakest males I know, so
Mhm.
I have no I have no illusions about the fact that there are plenty of women who could kick my ass. But on average, this is another thing I say to my class. I say, okay, imagine you have to pick somebody to fight to the death in an iron cage. Are you picking a woman or are you picking a man? Now you might pick a woman and then get Ronda Rousey and get your ass destroyed. But on average, the appropriate decision to make, of course, is that you would rather fight a woman, obviously,
Yeah,
right?
it's something like the average man is like stronger than something crazy like 90% of women or something
Right,
ridiculous.
exactly. Yeah. I mean, like, I I'm even one of the weakest males, and I think I could probably win a fight against the average woman. And I'm like, I must be
You're not
bottom
setting a high bar
1%.
for yourself there, man.
No, I'm not. I'm like, I'm
Give
literally
yourself a little more
probably,
credit.
no, I don't
You're
deserve it there.
so
I don't.
interested in masculinity, but you can't fight. Come on, what is this?
I have I express my masculinity through like chess or something, you know?
Okay, so more cerebral.
Yeah, cerebral masculinity,
Yeah, there we go.
tactics in battle or something.
Yeah.
That's how I
Well,
could
of course,
contribute.
military strategies.
Yeah,
Yeah.
exactly. Exactly.
Okay. Um, so as somebody who's now been canceled,
Yep.
and I haven't read all. I'm gonna admit I haven't read all of your tweets and I haven't read all of your research that you've published. So
Sure.
there might
Don't
be some
expect
stuff
me
in
to.
there that maybe I don't agree with, and maybe I'll
Oh,
regret this later. I have no idea. Um, but I'm not saying that to accuse you of anything.
sure. No, I totally understand.
But what do you think? Is there a solution to this long term in terms of being able to continue to have a thriving intellectual discourse? And because I have some ideas about what some of the solutions might be.
Hmm.
I don't think that returning to the institutions or trying to take them over again or something like that makes any sense for the people that have already been ousted or were
Yeah.
never in the club in the first place.
Yeah.
Um,
So
what are your thoughts?
let me comment on that, the first part that you said, because I think it's an important thing, and then move on. So one thing that's unfortunate about getting canceled is that other people have to be worried about associating with you. And I'm not saying you're actually worried. I'm on here, obviously, but because
I'm
they,
ready to be canceled.
yeah, because they're, you can't expect somebody to read every tweet that I've sent and every article I've written. And so if you're using a heuristic that's just, well, this guy got canceled, he has a rat
It
wiki.
must be a bad person.
Exactly. Maybe he really did. He must have said something bad. And
And honestly, the average person hears that and they're not going to take any time to go look. They're
exactly.
just going to
They're
say,
not.
"Oh, you're no platforming him. He's probably a racist. He's
Right.
probably a
He
sexist. He's
probably
probably an
is. I
asshole."
mean, exactly. So that's one unfortunate aspect to the getting canceled thing is just you become radioactive for a lot of people, quite understandably, because they don't want to get tarred with the guilt by association phenomenon. So that's one thing. Now, yeah, I don't. I think social sciences and academia are they're just too far gone. Like I spent a lot of time thinking, the best strategy was to reform from the inside and to push as far as one could push, but be realistic about it. But what I've seen in the past 2, 3 years, and especially in the past couple of months, has persuaded me that that idea is the time for that is over. It's past, unfortunately. And I think one thing that I would emphasize that people really don't understand is how much self-censorship there is in academia, especially like in the social sciences. So I know many professors, obviously I'm not going to name names, but I know many professors who privately share opinions quite similar to mine, which I consider perfectly reasonable.
Mm.
Or if they don't agree, they would say, yeah, it's like it's a reasonable, a lot of your ideas are reasonable, but they're not going to say that publicly because they understand how things work. It really is like living in a religious society in which you have the orthodoxy. And there are lots of people who don't believe it, but they don't say so publicly. So privately, people get together and be like, yeah, that's ridiculous or whatever. This is silly. But people are too afraid to challenge it publicly. And so you get this sort of surrealistic, dualistic world in which you have these people who all kind of know better, but they're quiet about it. And then you have this other segment of people who are zealous defenders of the orthodoxy, and they have outsized influence because people are afraid to challenge them publicly, etc. And that's what social science is like right now. I mean, there's just no breaking through the cocoon that they have created now. I think the journal system is pretty much going to be lost to people who write about various controversial topics, because one thing that really disconcerted me that I've seen over the past couple of months is the trend of trying to get articles retracted because you don't like them, because you
Right.
don't like their politics, instead of like I think you should
Well,
reserve.
there was a study on police use of force that
Yes,
Michigan State pulled
yes,
because people just didn't like the conclusions of the study.
yes,
There was
yeah,
nothing wrong with it. It was methodologically fine. The data was
right.
fine. The researchers were credible. They just were like, well, this is counter narrative, and if we talk about this, then it's a problem, and people are reporting it, so we're going to throw it away.
That incident was the one that made me the most sort of depressed, because it was purported to be an author, the author himself or the
Right.
authors.
They caved.
They caved and they released this statement in which they blamed Heather McDonald for misrepresenting their results, but they didn't specify how she had misrepresented them.
For
But
talking
let's
about them.
Right, but let's say she had misrepresented them.
Mhm.
As an academic, I can tell you that your results get misrepresented incessantly. Like that's just what happens. You publish a paper, people are going to misrepresent it. That's, there's no need to retract something because of that. So yes, I mean, that's really depressing. And I see this there's this Twitter page. It's like anti-racist science, and it went from like 800 followers to like 10,000 in a night, as far as I could tell. And they have this document where you can link articles that you think are racist and problematic, and they will go after them to try to get them retracted. So people might think, well, only a few articles end up getting retracted. What's the big deal? The big deal is this: it instills fear in editors, and they're not going to be willing to take a chance on your article because they don't want the mob to come at them. So
Mhm.
every article that gets retracted, you figure there are probably 50 more that aren't going to get published because everybody's too afraid to touch them now. And I
So
mean,
I
yeah,
can hear the refrain in my head right now, and it goes, why would you try to publish something if you think it might be racist? I think that's sort of the boilerplate response that you get from people who think that this isn't a problem, or think that
Right.
it's overblown. They just say, well, if they think it might be racist, then obviously there's an issue with whoever was writing it, because how would you not just be obviously anti-racist all the time?
Somebody, I mean, I know people have looked at this, but like I think this deserves a lot more attention even than it gets, which is that the word racist is almost utterly meaningless at this point in history, because the people who use it as a bludgeon to smite their political foes have used it way too often. And so now perfectly empirical assertions are called racist. So, for example, if you even point to data that show that there's a massive disparity in violent crime between blacks and whites, that is enough to get you called racist at this point in history. And that is a serious problem, because now we have this concept that's
you can't talk about facts. You
yeah,
can't talk about the truth.
exactly.
How are you going to solve any problems if you can't talk about
Yeah,
anything?
you can't, because you can't talk about it. And yeah, so that's the problem, is like racism. I mean, like what's ironic, perversely ironic, I would say, is that the one form of explicit racism that we have in our society, to my knowledge, is affirmative action. That is the explicit preference for people of color by universities. And it is quite large. I mean, if you look at the sort of benefit that you get as a black applicant over a similarly situated white or Asian applicant, it's quite remarkable. That is flat out racism by any definition of racism. On the other hand,
Yeah, institutional, systemic, whatever you want to say about it.
Exactly. On the other hand, the claim that there are differences between blacks and whites on average that are partially genetically caused, that is not racist. That is a scientific hypothesis. However, one of those is practiced and applauded by progressives. The other one is called racist. Now, there's something perverse about that. So that's the problem with this. It's like, yeah, of course, if like if you wrote a manuscript and you actively encouraged the destruction of American Jews, that would be racist. You shouldn't get that published. If you wrote a manuscript and you said American Jewish people have an IQ that's roughly 10 points higher than Gentiles, we think there's partial genetic causation, that's not racist, and we should be allowed to publish it, and then we should debate it the way we debate anything else. So that's, but I just, after the George Floyd death and when the protests started taking off, you saw it was an opportunity for progressives to flex their muscles and to take power, and they did not squander that opportunity. I mean, like, in some sense, you have to tip your cap to them, because it was really impressive how quickly they used that to get a bunch of retractions, to get more institutional power, to get these
insane amounts of money, by the way.
Insane amounts of money, absolutely.
Like insane amounts, like billionaires donating
Yes.
to, these ridiculous groups that popped up like 3 days ago.
Right. And you have these journals, Nature, coming out with all of these, anti-racist articles, in the New England Journal of Medicine.
As if that has anything to do with science.
Right. And I'm just like, like, that's, if you want to do that in your private time, fine, but that's not what we're doing.
Or in the anti-racism journal, I'm sure it's out there.
Yeah, exactly. There must be 5 of those journals anyway. So yeah, I mean, we're not. I'm with you. In other words, put a short point in a very long way, that we're not going to reform the institutions from the inside at this point.
Okay. So, yeah, like I said, I think we're mostly in agreement on this point. I'm going to try to push back a little bit here, so it's not just us saying, yeah, I agree to each other.
Fair enough.
I don't necessarily agree with your assessment. I don't think, at least short to medium term, like I don't think that the general public is on board with this. And I do think that despite all the media suppression and just silence about what's happening, because they just say, well, we're just not going to say it, and then it's not real. I think the general public does see through a lot of the veneer. You know, a lot of the malicious tactics, a lot of the engine, blah 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 blah. I'm looking for genuine, non
Disingenuousness.
disingenuous. Yeah, that's what I'm looking for. A lot of the disingenuousness and
Yeah.
and just the emptiness of these movements, and also that they generally aren't being operated by the people that they're claiming to represent. I mean, Black Lives Matter is run by, there's obviously black people in charge of Black Lives Matter, but it's
Yeah.
also run by a bunch of Jews and other random white people. So it's not, and most of the foot soldiers on the ground at the protests, at the riots, whatever you want to call them, the Antifa people, the however you want to slice these groups of people that are out in the streets, whatever you want to call them, uh, it's not it's not like the majority of people of color are even interested in these kinds of things, or necessarily even in those groups. It's very much like a bourgeois, like middle class, upper middle class white movement, in
Yeah.
my opinion.
So okay. So I think there's
They're all college educated. It's
yeah, I
silly.
think there's at least a little, more than a little truth to that. I would push back a little bit in this sense. I hear that argument often, but I think that where it's probably wrong is that it is better for even the average African American to have these kinds of movements constantly pushing for them to have more prestige in society. I think there's a very understandable reason that African Americans vote overwhelmingly for Democrats, in other words. So let's just take that. Like, they are having their needs peculiarly attended to. Now, we can say, well, a lot of this is sort of like intra bourgeois white signaling and sort of status competition. It is, I agree with that, but they're proclaiming the sort of nobleness, purity, and we should worship this group of victims, right? And if you're in that victims group, I don't think it's unreasonable for you to be like, you know what, I like this. I like that people are talking about us as if what we say has more value than what other people say, and as if we are like the most important group in this social system.
Yeah, and you should be elevated, and you should be given all the
Yes,
opportunities and
yes, you should
the
get
good
more
jobs and the nice
resources.
titles and the
Yeah, exactly.
degrees, and
Exactly.
we should just get you on all the boards, and you should
Right.
publish more of your art, and like whatever you're doing is just
Whatever.
amazing, and we
Yeah.
need to promote it.
Right. And so I think that
It certainly could cause some problems if you're not in those groups.
yes, if you're not in those groups, you can see why you might get a little bit angry after a while. And like these uh, this sort of painful, poignant reflection from these white elites about why white people are mad with Democrats and voted Trump. It's just so comical to me. Is it really that hard to figure out why a white man might be like, yeah, no thanks, I don't want the Democrats? I mean, we're the most loathed. If you had to take one group and say who's the most explicitly hated group in our society, it's white men. Now, I'm not saying we don't have a lot of power. Obviously, we do. But in terms of explicit conversation, there is more explicit denunciations of white men than any other group in society. And it's actually not in any way merited when you actually look at white male behavior in modern society, which is some of the most noble, tolerant behavior in the history of the planet.
Yeah, I mean, I think every race has had amazing contributions
Sure,
to world
absolutely.
history and so forth.
Yeah.
But I, you know, I, I go many different directions with this because this is something that I'm aware of, and I see it around me and I feel it in myself. And it's hard to know what to do about it. I know that some societies, like I hear, and I haven't done a lot of looking into this, but So, but I hear that in South Africa, for example, since the end of apartheid, they've gone so far an extreme the other way that it actually is starting to become very, I guess, disfavorable to be white in
Mm-hmm.
that society.
Mm-hmm.
And so, I don't know. I guess what I'm saying is like I keep hearing from, a lot of people say, well, okay, these are two white men. They're talking on a podcast together. They're both well educated for whatever that's worth anymore.
Yeah.
Uh, and and so obviously they have some level of privilege. And they're talking about these issues of white privilege and black movements and so forth. Uh, I think I think a lot of this is actually just projection from the elites. I see a lot of people who they do this thing where they climb up the ladder and then they're pulling it up from underneath them. So,
Mm-hmm.
you'll see these rich white guys who will, CEOs and so forth, who, have already made their success, people like Mark Cuban and so forth. And then they're going on and lecturing the rest of society about how, minorities can't get ahead and everything's been set up too easy for white people. And it's like, wait a minute, man, I think you're talking about your life, not mine.
Right, right, right.
And
Well,
the
yes.
the response is like, look, there are a small percentage of white men who are extraordinarily successful, and they're way more successful than everybody else. And
Yeah.
yes, if you look at the most successful people in the world, or not in the world, at least not in the world, in the United States, they're a large percentage, overwhelmingly, they're white men, right? There's
Yeah.
also a lot of Jews on that list. What do you
Yes.
make of that? They're only 2% of
Well,
the population. So
I know, but
so, it's not
yeah.
necessarily that every inequity is the result of some sort of evil system.
Well, as I say often, disparity does not equal discrimination. So, I mean, it's not even really like prima facie discrimination. I mean, in fact, if you look throughout the history of the animal kingdom in general, you get variation. That's sort of that's how nature rolls. There's variation. Groups, sexes, ages, nobody's going to be the same. You're going to have some kind of differences, and that's okay. What we should concern ourselves with, of course, are differences that are caused by unfair prejudices, really unfair, explicit discrimination. We should certainly eliminate, but we have. The only kind that we have in society now is explicitly in favor of African Americans. Now, that doesn't mean that there aren't racist humans. There are, obviously. It doesn't even mean that there aren't obstacles that certain groups have to get through that other groups maybe don't have to, although I'm more skeptical of that than most people. But it does mean that we don't have explicit discrimination, and that, yes, it's interesting that we get. I think about it like this, like you gave the Mark Cuban example. I'll give like the Ezra Klein example. I think it's interesting because you get these elite whites who, I mean, Mark Cuban's a bit different because he can actually point to economic success and say, I created X businesses, I own the Dallas Mavericks, I do this for them, etc.
Well, yeah, I'm not saying his wealth was ill-gotten or
Oh no, I
anything
know.
close to that at all.
Yeah, no, I understand, but it's different with, like, let's say you're an Ezra Klein or a Michelle Goldberg, one of these prominent white journalists who's constantly talking about racism and how, sexism, etc. So then the question that follows naturally is, why should we listen to you? Why should I listen to you, Ezra? Like, what gives you the right to lecture us about life? Why should I listen to you, Michelle Goldberg? And
Mm.
a lot of these people can't say, well, you should listen to me because I'm smarter than you are, because they pretend not to not to think that's true, right?
Yeah.
They pretend not to think that I'm actually just smarter than you are and I write better. So what
Well,
they
this is
say,
my favorite thing about the intelligence debate, where they're just like, "Oh, everybody's smart." It's like, no,
yeah,
no, they're
exactly.
not.
I know, and it's so condescending. I really dislike that tendency, but it leads to this interesting need to justify your status, right? Because if you're Michelle Goldberg and you're getting paid a good chunk of money to write at the New York Times and you're not smarter than everybody, then why do people listen to you? And the answer is because she's morally better than you are. Like that's the ultimate justification that they would give, is that they're aware of the sort of pervasive racism and sexism that plagues society. And because of that, because of their moral enlightenment, you should listen to them. And I think that's how they justify their own status to themselves too, as yes, I eat with famous people and I have a lot of money and I live in New York, but I deserve it because I'm a morally great person who's talking about all of these problems that the sort of benighted masses are too blind to see. That's a hypothesis, of course, but I think it works well.
It's also that you just have to realize, if you're self-aware at all, that if you're in that level of privilege, that obviously most other people don't have anything close to that in terms of their influence, in terms of the lifestyle,
Yes,
the money. So,
right.
so I mean, I don't want to go Freudian on this, but like, I feel like they're just paying off a guilt, a lot of this is just them, because they can't say, I don't deserve this. I'm not actually that much better than everybody else.
Yeah, I agree.
I just came from a good family and I happen to have the right social networks and I went to the right college.
Good
like
genes, whatever.
Yeah. So, it's just like, I don't even necessarily agree that people like Ezra Klein and Michelle Goldberg are necessarily smarter than you, whoever this you is. I don't have a great grasp on like their intellectual capacity just from their writing, which is mostly what I know about them. Obviously, Ezra built Vox, so that's pretty impressive.
Smart dude.
Yeah,
I'll tip my hat to him.
Right. But there are certainly other people who are of equal or better intelligence who don't have a voice.
Yeah, and absolutely.
So you're saying that your point there was just that, though, the reason they're allowed to have a platform in a mainstream media outlet is because of the fact, I mean, other than Ezra founded his own, is because of the fact that they fit the right moral orthodoxy. And obviously, if Vox was a right-wing outlet, it would be treated totally differently.
Sure, but I mean, it's not exactly that too, because I'm a little less skeptical than you are that Ezra Klein and say Michelle Goldberg are more intelligent than most people. They are. They're talented.
Well, I would say most people. I would just say like, I just know for a fact that there are lots of other people that are probably around or even more intelligent who are not at very good stations. And obviously you can always say like, well, they made different choices or whatever. I mean, who knows how much randomness there is, but like,
yeah, I agree with that. I definitely agree with that. So
they're not necessarily the best for that position.
Yeah, absolutely. And in fact, I think
probably not.
Both of them are bad on certain topics.
Health of journalism.
Yeah, I'm a little more sympathetic to Klein than a lot of my conservative friends are, but I see his blind spots. But yes, you have the right moral orthodoxy, you have the right beliefs, and also that is, I think you're right. I don't think this need be Freudian. I think it is to assuage their guilt, because how do you? It does cause consternation to recognize that actually you're the privileged person. You're always talking about white privilege, but you're the one who's privileged. You have
look in a mirror.
Yeah, exactly. Like, do you think like, I mean, if we compare the amount of privilege like Ezra Klein has to the amount of privilege somebody who's white who was born in the hills of West Virginia has, it's not even close, right? So I do think it works to assuage that guilt. You have to say, well, I'm morally just and enlightened, and I'm using my platform to enlighten other people. And therefore, if I don't deserve this, at least I'm making good use of it, right? And that almost increases the moral fervor of these kinds of people. And I think moral fervor is scary. I think it's something that the more you look at history and interesting analyses of human psychology, the more you find that moral fervor is one of the most dangerous human motivations. It causes vastly more suffering than, say, sociopathy or something, because sociopaths, you get a few of them, they do terrible things. It's awful. But to get a society of people to consent to atrocities, you need moral fervor. You need a narrative that says that what they're doing is just, right? And that's why
Mm.
moral fervor disconcerts me in the fact that our a large chunk of our intelligentsia are captured by this moral fervor that we call wokeism for short. You can say that's unfair, but it's a good term, I think, for that. That disconcerts me because it will start to justify more and more behaviors that otherwise wouldn't be justifiable. And just an example, canceling people. I
Right.
think if you didn't have this moral fervor and you asked, should I'll just take me as an example. Should somebody who gets very good teaching evaluations and is remarkably productive for a scholar, for a young scholar, should they be fired for their views? Most people would say no, of course not. That's unjust. But when you have that moral fervor and that, wait a second, they're saying something that could be harmful to this sacred group and therefore it is justified, that's scary. That's when people start getting hurt and when you start violating important norms, due process, rule of law, etc.
Hmm. So this is actually something that I wanted to get into because it's really frustrating for me when I talk to even some of my closest friends about this. Uh, uh, I obviously most of the people that I know, I'll just say, are on the left, and
Mm-hmm.
they identify with the left. They're voting for Joe Biden very affirmatively. And uh, when I've been following, say, the culture war since maybe I don't know, summer of 2016,
Mm-hmm.
somewhere around there. And then I got really tuned in after Trump won the election, and I realized that all the polls didn't really matter, and the New York Times didn't know what they were talking about. Um, and Since then, I've been mostly like floating in like different IDW circles and so forth. So I've been following a lot of people that have been canceled. I followed a lot of the Brett Weinstein experience when that first started to hit off at Evergreen and so forth.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and when I talk to my friends and family about this, they say that they just don't think cancel culture is a problem, and they
Mm-hmm.
think that all the people who are getting canceled probably deserve to be canceled.
Mm-hmm.
And also the other thing I hear is that even if they don't deserve to be canceled, that they're all from privileged groups and
Mm-hmm.
high
Yeah.
status positions, and so it
Mm-hmm.
doesn't matter that they're canceled because they're going to be
Right.
fine anyway.
Right.
And it just infuriates me because it's just not true. Like none of it is true.
Not only
I
is it
know people who are getting canceled who are not high paying positions. They don't have
right.
any backup plans. They're not
Right.
well networked to just go walk into some other job. And they're not atrocious human beings either. They're not saying horrible things. They're
Right.
just falling into this mass hysteria that you were talking about. They're just becoming another casualty in this fervor.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
it's so frustrating because the average person, they just don't care.
I mean, it's interesting. So I'll work my way into that. Just the argument that the person is privileged, therefore rules of fairness don't matter,
Yeah,
is
this is
one that,
kulakism.
yeah,
We could seize your
exactly.
farm because you're successful,
It's
so it's our
very
farm.
disconcerting to me. People said that about Brett Kavanaugh. Like,
Hmm.
who cares? You're not, you know, like,
Yeah.
you're not guaranteed a spot on the Supreme Court. And it's like, no, you're
Yeah.
not. But if
Yeah.
you
As if
work
he was entitled
hard,
to it.
right, and it's like if you worked hard and somebody lies about you, that shouldn't cause you not to get the job that you earned. And so it's just this really weird and yeah, you're right, like
I mean,
this
you're talking about people's
scary,
livelihoods. You're talking about their lives.
yeah. So
Your
like
vocation is your life. Like,
yeah, and so like in my case, for example,
hmm.
I'm not making a lot. I was never making a lot of money. I'm hugely in debt because I was in college for 10 years of my more than 10 years of my life, and I don't have it's not as if I had a backup plan, right? You know, like I worked really hard to get a PhD in the field that I like so that I could do what I love, namely be a professor and teach students. And, you know, it's terrible to lose the opportunity to do that. And I'm sure people like Colin Wright and Noah Carl and Weinstein and Hayek, all of those people feel the same. And none of them, and I know all of them at least a little bit, and some of them I'm good friends with, None of them are bad humans. None of them think that we should be mean to people. None of them think we should discriminate against people. What they do think is that we should be able to talk about scientific hypotheses without losing our minds. And we should
Right.
be able to talk about things that are controversial because that's precisely what academia was supposed to be about. That's what the people in academia pretend they care about. And yeah, it is. And I mean, the other thing I would say about the sort of cancel culture phenomenon is it's not just the people who have been fired. We're warnings to everybody else. And so I'm
Canary in
much
the coal
more,
mine.
yeah, I mean, even I would say more like the head that got cut off and put in your house so that you know not to mess with the mob, right? like,
Right.
like
Yeah.
when one
The dead
person,
horse in the bed.
yeah, exactly, exactly. That's a good one. It's the dead horse in the bed. It's like, look, if we'll fire this person, you know what we'll do to you, so keep in line, right? And so that's what worries me is just the sort of terrorizing effect that it has on discourse and professors. And as I said much earlier, there really is this dual world of people who all kind of get that the sort of official stuff is BS and they talk to each other and they're like, yeah, it's kind of BS or whatever, but they're afraid to say so publicly. Now, I'm not comparing 2020 United States to the Soviet Union. It's not that bad, obviously. But there are the parallels that there's just like a group of people who know that all of the official narrative stuff is kind of BS, but they don't want to say it publicly because they realize if you do, you may lose your job, you lose your prestige, people don't want to work with you anymore, etc. And
Mhm.
so you have this large group of people who private but can't share them publicly. That is a terrible state of affairs to have an intellectual world in which you cannot talk about your best guess at the truth on some topic or your hypothesis about topic YX, whatever, you know? I mean, that's just everybody loses when you can't do that.
Yeah, you've got preference falsification, and that
Yes.
creates shared knowledge problems and
Yes.
coordination
Yep.
problems.
Yep.
And really, this is a game theory issue because if you get enough people who object to whatever the false narratives are that are being promulgated, um, I mean, this is the idea about why everybody, all these people that I'm friends with, and including myself, who are sort of free speech advocates, are always saying this. Like, look, the problem is that you can't actually, if you don't get one person, if you don't get a domino effect of people actually saying what they think,
Yeah.
then nothing, it'll just go on this way.
Yeah, it's a
You know,
collective action dilemma, right?
yeah.
Because it's
And the first
better for
person who speaks up gets their head chopped off. So,
exactly, right? It would be better for
like you
all
did.
of us. Yeah, exactly. It would be better for all of us if we all came out publicly and said, "Look, we all think this.
Hmm.
Like enough is enough. Stop this bullshit." Problem is, it's better for each individual if some idiot like me does it and then gets taken out, right? And I stupidly believed, I naively believed that I would somehow be magically protected by norms of academic freedom. Like I just,
You didn't have tenure yet, right?
no, I didn't.
Okay.
But I thought, look, like I'm
You
getting
still
stuff.
believed you still
Yeah,
believed in like the liberal academic,
yes, I
you
was
know,
stupid. Like one of my,
forthrightly exploring
yeah,
ideas.
my friend always just tells me, I'm an idiot. I'm so naive and stupid, and I was, and now I'm very disgruntled by everything because I and I know other people. I mean, I'm just talking about my own story because it's obviously the one I know the best, but I know this happened in other people's cases as well. I did everything you were supposed to do. Like, I played by all the explicit rules, and my mistake was I was intellectually honest. When people asked me what I thought about something, I tried to answer them as well as I could. When I had to write about a topic that I was interested in, I tried to write about it as honestly as I could. I always said I could be wrong. I'm not sure about this. We should have an argument about it. And that yeah, that stuff, it's just too bad that you can't do that anymore. And then, yes, you're right. I mean, it's just like, it's clearly a collective action dilemma. And it, the thing that disappoints me is that there are a lot of high status people. I mean, like really high status people who know better and they won't use their status. And I think to myself, when I'm bitter, sometimes I'm not bitter, sometimes I am. And when I am, I think, okay, you have tenure, use it. You know, like that's what it's
Right.
for,
Gnome.
man.
I'm looking at you, Gnome.
Well,
No, I'm gonna
no,
sign in that Harper's letter.
yeah, but no, to be
I'm not.
fair,
I'm kidding. I'm kidding. I love
yeah,
Gnome.
yeah, yeah,
Come on my show.
yeah, right, exactly. I mean, to be fair to, like, let's say, like, no,
But he could
that,
say more. I mean, he's,
well, but that
I don't
dude
know.
seriously put his head out there. I mean, he's actually defended people who said really I mean, like nasty things, and he
Oh,
has
no, Chomsky.
defended them. Yeah,
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 Chomsky, at
yeah, yeah.
significant cost to
I'm not.
himself.
I'm not saying that he doesn't, you know, put himself on the line.
There are some people who signed that letter, though. By the way, there are lots of people. When I read through, I mean, I think,
I'm sure
look,
you know more about them than I do.
yeah,
So
I think the letter's better than nothing. But when I read some of the names on it, I got a little bit nauseated because I thought, like, come on, dude, you're contributing to some of these cancels.
I felt like the letter was actually more about Trump than it was about cancel culture. I
Yeah,
felt
I
like
didn't
what they
like
were.
that either.
I
Yeah.
felt like what they were saying was basically like, if you keep up this misbehavior, then Trump's going to win. And so it felt to me like it
Yeah.
was a very disingenuous way of like adding that in there. Like if you actually were concerned about academic freedom, why is that relevant? I don't know.
Yeah, I didn't like that either, but I'll do the little bit. I'll defend it a
Like
little.
I understand that they have to
Yeah,
like distance
I think
themselves.
I think that's the problem. It's the conundrum of trying to appeal to progressives about free speech now, because progressives are so far gone on that topic that when you get like Chatterton Williams, I think he's pretty laudable on the issue, but he's trying to appeal to a lot of progressives. And so you have to make this kind of milquetoast statement. You have to preface it by saying, we all agree that Trump's the real terror in the world. And by the way, look at what happened. So you make this milquetoast statement, you preface it with Trump, and it still causes a furor from
Yeah, they
progressives.
don't care. You're not going to be okay just because you
Right.
said that.
That's what I say. It's like, you know what? You have to just think, F it. Like at some point, you're not going to win these people. It's over. What you have to do is stop trying to win that group because it's going to require sacrificing the actual value that you care about and say, you know what? No, we're done with you. Like, we're going to fight you and try to win that argument, but we're not going to persuade you because that's just not going to happen. That's where I am, at least. And I mean, I used to be a firm advocate of conciliation. Like, let's work to get these people. But I just think it's not going to happen anymore. We're past that. You can't, if somebody is going to say that J.K. Rowling is like some transphobic terrorist, that person's done. We're not going to reach them. Like, okay, fine, you're going to think that, and we're going to argue against you and hope that we win that cultural battle.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, I've also come around to just like not saying anything when I hear stuff like that. Even people that are close to me, it's not worth fighting that. Like, that's not going to be the hill that I die on. Like defending J.K. Rowling's like, tweets about trans people. Like, even if I agree with her, even if I know that the position that you're saying is wrong or a misrepresentation of even how a lot of trans people feel, uh, it's it gets to a point where it's so destructive to even have the dialogue or attempt the dialogue that it's better to just go on and do your own thing. But I'm sorry. I know you.
But yes, I mean, I totally understand that. But the problem is then that like concedes victory. It's like victory of the whiniest. You know what I mean? It's like,
Sure,
it's like,
sure. I guess my point is like I just don't think that like like my friend from college's Facebook post actually matters that much. Like I don't think she's convincing anyone that hasn't already agreed with
oh,
it, and I don't
sure,
think
yeah,
anyone who
that's definitely
disagrees is
fair.
changing
Yeah,
their mind. So
sure.
it's just not worth it to have the argument.
Yeah, I agree with that. I think you have to pick and choose and like think about like, okay, what are you doing? What is the actual, what are the predictable effects of this or that kind of argument, right?
So, um, I know that like you're still in a vulnerable position with regard to your, I guess, future. It sounds like,
Hmm.
um, but and so maybe your perspective on this will change like a year out or a couple of years out from this. Maybe I'll have you back. But um, what can be done, right? So we've got this cancel culture. It's largely, it looks like, mediated by technology, by social media, basically. The fact that everyone has a phone. We've
Hmm.
got this panopticon now with iPhones in everyone's pockets, so everything can get recorded,
Hmm.
and everything that you do online obviously stays on forever. So you have now a history that's trailing behind you that
Yeah.
you didn't have.
Right.
Um, what can be done? Do you think this needs to be attacked in the realm of I mean, on the realm of, obviously it needs to be attacked in the realm of norms, but cultural values? Do you think there needs to be some sort of institutional power? Um,
I mean,
how do
I
you think we
would,
get around this?
yeah, I would like to see the development of some countervailing institution somehow. And I don't know exactly how that would play out or will play out, but I'd like to see that. And then I mean, I would just say we can come up with like broad plans, and I think that's a good idea to do so, but those are always hard to instantiate. They take time, you have to collaborate with people, etc. So on a personal level, what I say is just try to be intellectually honest and not participate in the cancel part and just have dialogue with people, be respectful, debate, but be honest. And the more that there is, I think, you display the behavior that you would like other people to emit. And so I can't tell you how many emails or messages I get from people who are like, "Hey, I saw this or I followed your discussion here and I really liked it. You were nice, but you were forceful and you said things that I wanted to say but I can't or whatever." And for every person who does that, there are probably 10 other who see it and think, "Oh yeah, yeah, that's what I want to do. We should be able to talk about these things and we can do it without being rude to each other." So I mean that's what I think is important to do on a personal level is what's the cheesy there's a cheesy saying like be the change you want to see or something.
Yeah, lead by example, find the
Right.
others,
Yeah,
whatever you want
all
to
of
say.
these kinds of cheesy sayings that,
Start a manor bund. I don't know.
yeah, yeah. I mean, they're all kind of sappy and ridiculous. But on the other hand, it's true, and it's what I try to do. And in the, I know people who are trying to do some institutional things, and I'll participate in that if we ever get those off of the ground, and other people too. And I think that's really important because, of course, you're not going to fight this one individual at a time, right? You have to have some sort of collective power. But if you want to know what each individual can do in his or her own life, just be what you want to see. And I often think about this with a lot of social justice warrior types. They're so mean to people. And I think, if you want to increase the amount of social justice in the world, just be nice.
Yeah, yeah.
That would be
It,
like a great start.
the paradox of the people who are preaching empathy and then display none of it
Did you
on a regular
see?
basis is
Yeah.
astonishing.
Did you see that? I mean, it's not that important, but it really illustrates this. There was a Glenn Greenwald tweet in which he was just lambasting Ben Shapiro, calling him like literally an idiot and he's stupid and he's soulless. And why was he doing it? Because Ben Shapiro was making the argument that empathy is actually bad for politics. Now I thought, okay, so your argument is Shapiro is
What
like
a beautiful
soulless
example.
idiot. Yeah, exactly. I was utterly shocked by the apparent unself-awareness of that. So yeah, yeah, be nice to people. It's
Yeah.
not that hard. Be respectful in discussions.
Empathy is important, you piece of shit.
Yeah, exactly. How dare you? I mean, we should murder you for saying empathy is not important. I mean, it's just bizarre. Yeah, but I don't have any like grand vision or whatever, like I I read a lot and think a lot about like the perversion of science in the Soviet Union. And again, I'm not trying to say that it's equally bad here, but there are some similarities. And I try to think about like, okay, well, what could you have done? And the answer sometimes, depressingly, is not a lot. You just have to keep making the same damned argument over and over and over and hope that small L liberalism, not capital liberalism, small L liberalism, free
Mm.
speech, free inquiry, due process, rule of law, these values end up triumphing.
Yeah, I mean, I think this is actually an existential threat to the republic. I mean, in terms of like nation states, you have a huge competitive advantage if, for example, you're China and your universities are studying hardcore math and science and
Yes.
ancient Greek and Chinese philosophy, and meanwhile your competitor is indulging in post-critical theory and just producing all of these degreed young people with
Right.
no like practical knowledge and just total and not even no practical knowledge, but they don't have uh any grounding in even like a deep philosophy of any kind that would be useful.
Yeah,
So
I mean,
like it's just
they hate
totally
their own country.
yeah.
I mean, I think it's even worse than that. It's not even that you have these, Now, like, look, let's be clear. There are lots of people getting great educations in STEM fields and who are doing great things in the United States. But
I have a humanities degree, so I'm not
oh,
totally exempt from this.
right, and I love the humanities, but it's not just that you're sort of, if you read like critical race studies, for example, I mean the shit is fucking meaningless, right? I mean I defy somebody. I was reading Cornell West a few days ago, and I was just like, what the fuck does this? And there's just no empirical content to it whatsoever. So not only are you getting this sort of meaningless gobbledygook,
I mean,
but
you're
you're
literally turning your brain into mush. Like
yeah, right, and then
you're
then it's actually
you're
like
like altering your perceptions in a way that like is gonna just make you less functional. I don't know.
yeah, and you're turning against the norms that created your society. Like I have to imagine like a Martian would look at our country and just think, what are these people doing? Like they created this amazing society, and now many of the young people think it's the worst thing to ever happen to humanity. Like yeah, it's I know. Look, maybe there are some critical theorists like Michel Foucault. I'm not an expert on him. I've read some of his work. Maybe some of these people have something to say. I'm not saying it's all nonsense, but a lot of it is manifestly nonsense. And it's a waste of a lot of human capital.
Yeah. So yeah, I mean, I've done a couple conversations with like Stephen Hicks and some others on like the roots of postmodernism and how it ties into critical theory and sort of
Yeah.
those schools of thought kind of co-evolved. Um, but okay, one thing. So we are kind of nearing the time here where we should probably be wrapping it
Yeah.
up here.
Yeah.
But yeah, I'm sure you have to go. But I have one thing that I wanted to get into you with, and maybe you don't have a lot of expertise in this, but you mentioned it earlier. You talked about the decline, or I guess the extinction of all male coalitions, right, in society. And I
Mhm.
wanted to ask you what you thought the cultural implications of that might be, and whether or not it might be valuable, if even though it may not be politically feasible, to try to like start reviving them again. Because I actually think that male companionship is
Mhm.
super duper important. A lot of
Mhm.
men these days are really isolated, even from other men.
Mhm.
And I think part of the reason for that is the fact that there are no spaces anymore where men can just be men with nothing but other men.
Right.
What do you
So
think?
what I would say on that is mostly informed speculation,
Sure.
but yes, I do think that there seems to be a problem with some men in modern society because I mean it's objectively the case that sort of traditionally masculine traits are sort of less valuable, and that's why men drop out of the sort of labor market, let's say at a higher percentage. I mean, more than 30% of men are not even participating in the labor market. That's incredible. And then there is this.
That's insane. That would be like a war in any
Yes.
other society.
Yeah, it's crazy. And then there's this sustained attack on a lot of components of masculinity, right? And it, yes, I mean, men have destructive tendencies, some, of course, but they also have a lot of good tendencies and that male behavior, that just going out and let's throw a football and beat the shit out of each other for 2 hours. It's good for people. Like that's people see that as somehow like retrograde and like, oh, that boys will be boys bullshit. Like that's really dangerous. No, like I think it really is good for people. It's good, you try some stupid things, you get hurt a little bit, but you form these bonds with other people that are hard to replace because you went through hardships together and you went through adventures together and you got in fights with each other. Yeah, so I would like to see something with that and some way of embracing that more in a positive way. You'd like to get rid of some of the excesses of it. So, for example, kicking the crap out of some kid because he's different from you is not a cool thing, and that's something
I was that kid a lot. So
yeah, okay, right. And I remember taking a few beatings and being whitewashed by the older males. And, it's not exactly fun, of course. And, I'm throwing eggs at houses. Why? Just because it was cool to break stuff or whatever.
Shooting out windows with BB guns.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. Yeah, those kinds of things that aren't necessarily the most constructive for society. But, there's a trade-off there because you lose that and then you lose a lot of these things that are important for men. Men do interact in a way with each other that maybe they don't. You get 3 women in your group and the dynamic changes completely. And now that you have women in every workforce, I do think that changes the dynamic. The way that, like, my mom says this is she just like, she cannot imagine how mean men are to each other. She said, you guys are so mean to each other. You say nasty stuff. And I'm like, no, that's just how we get along. Like we make jokes about each other and we razz on each other. And that's sort of like a form of play combat. I don't think women are as cool with that. And that's okay. But it means that if you're in a coalition and you have a bunch of women in there, you don't have the same interactions that you would have because, when you're razzing on the woman and you make a comment, maybe it hurts her feelings and that's not what you intended, but that's the result. And so it just changes that dynamic.
Yeah, my understanding is that the way that women express aggression tends to be more reputational damage.
Yes,
there's a difference there.
Yeah.
But
yeah, and just like the joking, like now, of course, there are lots of women who joke, and you sort of treat people as individuals, and you learn who takes the.
We're not saying women aren't funny, you guys.
Right, exactly. Who can be ironical and who's not? Who likes to play back and forth with jokes and who doesn't? Of course, but it just changes the dynamic of a coalition when you include women, and like that's why men like all male clubs from time to time, is because you can just go in there and be a male.
Yeah, well, that's what I'm saying is, I believe, I don't know his full name, but Evolving Moloch on Twitter.
Yeah,
Will, the anthropologist.
Yes, I cannot think of his last name for some reason, but yeah, I know. I
know
who
what I'm talking
about. Yeah,
you guys can find him. He's at Evolving Moloch. He studied secret societies. And one of the weird things about secret societies from an anthropological perspective is that they're almost exclusively all male.
Man,
which is really, really weird. And obviously I know a lot of like priestly class and warrior classes and things like that would have been all male and for a lot of places for almost all of human history. And so I do think you're right. I think that there is a group dynamic that changes inside, like when you're in an institution and you're trying to make sense or you're trying to make an important decision, there is something that changes even if you just throw one woman into the mix. I mean, if you have a room full of 5 guys and let's say some of those men are single and that woman happens to be attractive, well, now there's all these ulterior motives floating around the room, and guys are trying to impress her and guys are trying to look like they're the leader. And like, there's all this weird sexual competition dynamic that is a subtext that you can't talk about. but it's there and it's affecting the way they're able to coordinate and the way they're able to work together.
Yeah, and I think like that, just about like the sort of mixing of the workplace.
And it's not the woman's fault or that she's being a distraction.
No, it's not.
Like
Exactly.
It's just the way that the men are
just
going
how
to
it
act.
works, right?
Yeah.
And so like the mixing of the workplace and I think has been a positive thing for the most part, but there are trade-offs, right? There really is a trade-off. So I remember, this is obviously pure anecdote, but it illustrates the point. When I worked at this particular grocery store, the stockers, the people who put the grocery up and whatever, they were all men, and it was explicitly made that way by the management. And then after a couple of years of working there, that became, it was no longer tenable. So they started to accept women, and it changed the way, like, it was incredible how much the work environment changed from the day we took the first woman into the stock unit. Because as you said, one thing is men start acting a little bit differently because you've got this woman
they're not going to be as aggressive, they're not going to be as mean.
They're competing, they start competing in this different way for women's attention, and then some of the jokes that you would tell you can't tell anymore because they might be offensive to women, and like understandably so. I mean, some of them are offensive, but if you tell them privately or with a couple guys, it's like kind of okay, but then you include more people and then it's not okay anymore. And by the way,
women will have conversations with other women that they're not going to have around men.
Absolutely.
So it's not like it doesn't go both ways.
Well, that's one thing to end here, because I do have to go.
Yeah, I'll let you go.
Okay, but this thought that I've been having for a while about this weird thing, this idea that you don't have like different groups in which you can say things that you wouldn't say in another group. Because I've had a lot of people say, well, why would you say it if
don't be exclusive?
It would offend. Yeah, don't be exclusive. Why would you say it if it could offend people? And it's like, well, if you're in a group of 4 people, you can say some things that you're not going to say in a group of 100. And a lot of those things are funny to you if you're in a group of 4, but they would be hurtful if there's a group of 100, you know? Like the way that people, sometimes I'll tell a joke to like a friend and my friend will be like, that's mean. And I'm like, nobody's here who's going to hear it. Who gives a shit? You know what I mean? Like, and like, I get the point, which is like, you don't want to sort of harvest bad thoughts about groups, but you know what? Sometimes it's okay to say a ribald or offensive joke and nobody's going to hear it, and that's okay. And we can like kind of be happy about that. I just don't like this like growing sense that if you said something mean about women or this group or that group or whatever to another person, that means you're a bad person. No, we all have things that we like and don't like about each other. And sometimes we like to say them privately, and sometimes we like to make a joke. And I think that's okay. And sometimes men make jokes to each other that they wouldn't make with other women. And as you said, I've heard women talk to each other, and that shit is crazy, you know?
Yeah.
Sometimes that's crazy.
It's
and
like
that's
seeing
fine.
through the Matrix. You're just gonna.
Yeah, exactly. And that's fine. So, you know, that's fine. I don't think we should encroach on all of these spaces. We should instead be like, okay, look, like some of your jokes about men are going to be funny, but maybe if a bunch of men are around, you're not going to want to talk about them or tell them, vice versa.
Yeah. Well, I like the way that you phrase that in that last part here, just encroaching on spaces, because it really is this phenomenon of part of tearing down all the walls in society means tearing down all of the privacy, right? And so you don't have any internal privacy. You're not allowed to have a small group or even have your own private thoughts.
Well, that's that sort of like freedom of association, right? To some degree. Now, like, it's different. If you're at a university, you can't be like, oh, we want free association, so we're only going to hire liberals or whatever. But if you want like a small group, you can be like, there's nothing wrong with saying, you know what, tonight I would like to be around 5 dudes and just do what dudes do. You know what I mean?
Yeah. Well, okay. I am going to let you go, but one last point I want to say, David Fuller actually at Rebel Wisdom, I think actually is doing all male sort of spiritual, like healing type groups where he does a lot of spiritual work and breath work and things like that with all male groups. I don't know if they also do co-ed groups. I'm sure he does.
Hmm.
But I just know that is a project that Rebel Wisdom
Okay.
is ongoing. And so
Mhm.
there are other things like this that are happening. Bo, I wanted to just thank you so much for coming on the show and telling everybody your story. Hopefully, we'll be hearing more from you. I'm sure you'll be
Great.
on other people's podcasts and so forth, and maybe even read some of your work in the future that'll be coming out. And any last words here before we let you go about I
Yeah,
guess
my last words of wisdom are
yeah,
I'll make some
give some
optimism.
hope.
So
Give some hope.
don't despair so much. You know, these things come and go and trends rise and fall. So I would just say try to be honest, have fair debate, be cordial, but say your opinion and try to be intellectually true to what you believe.
Awesome. Thank you, Bo.
Yep, thank you.
See ya.